Learned helplessness. Imagine you're in a room. The walls are high, smooth, cold. You try the door. It's locked. You bang on it, scream, push with everything you have. Nothing. No one comes. You wait. You try again. Still locked. You don't know how much time has passed, but eventually, you stop trying. This is learned helplessness, a psychological condition where the mind decides it's pointless to resist, even when escape is possible. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a process, and once it sets in, it doesn't just control what you do, it controls who you become. The term was coined through an experiment in the 1960s. Dogs were placed in a box with an electrified floor. Some had a way to stop the shocks by pressing a panel or jumping a barrier. Others didn't. The ones who had no control eventually gave up. Even when later given the chance to escape, they didn't move. They simply lay there and took the pain. They had learned that nothing they did mattered, so they stopped doing anything at all. That's learned helplessness. It doesn't just apply to animals, it's everywhere. In abusive relationships, in toxic workplaces, in systems designed to grind you down. It begins with resistance, refusal. But when your efforts are met with indifference, or worse, punishment, something changes. You stop fighting. Then you stop hoping. Then you stop believing that anything can ever change. At this point, sleep doesn't feel like rest. It feels like escape, like the only thing left you can control is turning off. You may have experienced it yourself. You try and try to be heard, to be treated fairly, to be understood. And every time, reality answers you with silence or cruelty. Over time, you adjust. You tell yourself, that's just how things are. Not because you've made peace with it, but because your mind has been trained to expect failure. This is not weakness, it's adaptation. The brain, brilliant and cruel, learns to protect you by numbing you. If trying leads to pain and giving up leads to nothing, nothing becomes the lesser evil. And this is where things turn dark. Learned helplessness doesn't stop at the surface, it seeps into identity. You don't just feel powerless, you start to believe you are powerless, that you're not the type of person who deserves better, that you're lazy, that you're incapable, that you've failed so many times. It must mean something about you. The lie becomes truth, and the more you believe it, the harder it becomes to remember that you ever fought in the first place. This belief changes your chemistry. Studies show that learned helplessness is linked to depression, anxiety, and chronic fatigue. Your brain rewires itself to expect failure and disappointment. Your nervous system flattens. Motivation dies. You don't just feel tired, you feel hollow. Sleep becomes the only safe space. But even there, your mind brings the weight with it. Dreams become echoes of your helplessness. So, how does this connect to sleep, to rest, to the night? Because helplessness makes the day unbearable. You dread waking up because it means facing a life that feels immovable. And when your mind is trapped in that state, falling asleep doesn't feel like restoration. It feels like collapse, like shutting down, like surrendering, not for peace, but because there's nothing left to fight with. But here's the most terrifying part. It becomes familiar. You stop noticing it. You start calling it normal. You laugh off your exhaustion. You tell people you're just tired, just busy, just stressed. But deep down, part of you has gone quiet. The part that used to scream when things were wrong. The part that believed you deserved more. That part learned to shut up, to stay still, to sleep through it. And in this silence, the world takes advantage. Systems thrive when people stop pushing back, when voices go quiet, when minds stop asking why and start saying, I guess this is just how it is. Learned helplessness becomes not just a personal prison, but a societal one. A quiet population is easy to control. A tired one doesn't rebel. A defeated one sleeps. So, how do you undo it? It starts with noticing, with naming it. That voice in your head that says, why bother, isn't yours. It was taught to you. That heaviness when you try to change something, it's not laziness, it's resistance trained into you. Every time you start to care and then shut it down, that's not logic. That's trauma echoing. You unlearn helplessness the same way it was installed, one experience at a time. You find one thing, one small thing you can control. You change it. You see it change. Then you do another and another. You don't wait for motivation. You don't wait to feel strong. You move while still tired. You resist while still scared. You speak while your voice shakes. And as you rebuild that muscle, sleep begins to change too. It becomes less of an escape and more of a return to yourself, to your will, to your worth. It no longer feels like giving up. It feels like recovery, but is hard because even now, even hearing this, that voice might still be whispering, nothing will change. That's how deep it goes. That's how quiet the trap is. But even hearing that voice and recognizing it, that's the beginning of freedom. Learned helplessness is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to confront it once you see it, not because you're broken, but because you were trained to forget your power. And once you remember, even just for a second, that your actions matter, that your voice counts, that you deserve more, that's the moment the cycle begins to break. That's the moment you stop sleeping to escape and start sleeping to heal. Because true rest is not just about silence, it's about safety, about knowing that when you wake up, you won't be walking into the same cage again. And when that moment finally comes, when sleep becomes choice, not surrender, that's when you know you're finally free. Obsessive rumination, prison of the mind. There are thoughts that don't end, not because they matter, but because they've found a crack in the mind. They slip through when the world is quiet. At night, when no one is around to distract or deny, a single sentence, a moment replayed, a question with no answer, and suddenly the brain becomes a loop, endless, recursive, consuming. This is obsessive rumination, a psychological trap where thoughts repeat, not by choice, but by force. The mind becomes stuck, frozen between past regrets and future fears. Time passes, but the thought remains, pressed against the inside of the skull like a whisper you can't unhear. It starts subtly. A memory resurfaces. Something you said, something you didn't say, a decision made, a look exchanged. It doesn't even need to be important, just unresolved. And once it's there, it won't leave. The brain begins to chew on it, over and over, as if repetition could rewrite reality. Sleep becomes difficult. The body is tired, but the mind refuses. It searches for closure that never arrives. Every possible variation is explored. What if I had done it differently? What did they mean by that? Was I wrong? Was I right? The answers don't matter. Only the spinning matters. Rumination isn't reflection. It's not insight. It's a malfunction, a hijacking of cognitive energy. Instead of solving a problem, the mind becomes the problem. Instead of clarity, there is friction. The more you try to let go, the tighter the thought clings. The ruminative mind feels like drowning in still water. Nothing moves, yet panic builds. The same sentence loops. Why did I do that? What if they never forgive me? What if it happens again? The brain tries to control the uncontrollable, to rewrite the past with present logic. But logic has no power here, only obsession does. Some ruminations are rooted in guilt, a mistake, real or imagined. The mind punishes itself with replay, not once, not twice, but hundreds of times, as if pain could become penance, as if self inflicted shame could undo history. Others are born of fear. The future spins out in worst case scenarios. What if I fail? What if they leave? What if everything collapses? These thoughts feel responsible, as if worry could prevent disaster, as if anxiety was the price of safety. There are no breaks, no off switch. Even moments of peace are punctured. A word, a scent, a silence, and the thought is back, lurking, whispering, spinning. The day becomes a distraction. The night becomes a reckoning. People on the outside don't understand. They say, just stop thinking about it. But that's like telling a drowning person to breathe. The ruminative mind doesn't obey. It doesn't want attention. It wants control. And control is an illusion it can never catch. The body suffers too. Muscles stay tense. Breathing grows shallow. The nervous system remains in fight or flight, responding to imagined threats as if they were real. Sleep is broken. Appetite shifts. Focus fades. The whole system is dragged down by a single looping thought. Some people turn to rituals, rechecking, rewriting, repeating phrases, anything to stop the thought from growing. But these only feed the cycle. The thought becomes the center of existence. Everything else becomes noise. Rumination often pairs with perfectionism, the belief that there's a right answer, a perfect decision, a way to be flawless in every action. This belief is poison because perfection is unattainable, and the ruminative mind never forgives imperfection. It also feeds off shame, not just, I made a mistake, but I am the mistake. The thought becomes identity. I'm a failure. I'm broken. I ruin everything. And once that narrative sets in, every new thought serves it. Every memory is filtered through self blame. Even when the thought is irrational, it feels real. Emotion makes it vivid. The brain believes what it feels, not what it knows. Logic can't overpower panic, and so the cycle continues. Sometimes the only relief is distraction, noise, screens, movement. But in stillness, the thought returns, like a ghost that only appears in silence. And eventually, even distraction stops working. The thought slips through everything. This is why rumination is often mistaken for personality. People say, I'm just overthinker. But it's not a trait. It's a symptom, a sign that something inside is unresolved, a trauma unprocessed, a fear unspoken, a boundary crossed. The darkest part of obsessive rumination is when it turns against survival. Thoughts of worthlessness, of despair, of escape. The loop becomes a noose, each repetition tightening around the will to live. And still, the mind spins, because that's all it knows how to do. Breaking the loop isn't easy. It requires intervention, therapy, cognitive restructuring, grounding in the present. The thought cannot be killed, but it can be released, starved of attention, seen, named, and left alone. Sometimes writing helps, putting the thought outside the body, giving it form, so it can be studied, not obeyed. Other times, movement helps, running, walking, shaking the body out of paralysis, anything to shift energy from mind to muscle. Mindfulness isn't a cure, but it's a weapon, not to stop the thought, but to watch it, to say, this is a loop, this is not me. And in that witnessing, a small distance forms, a crack in the cycle. Sleep returns, slowly, not perfectly. Some nights, the thought returns, pounding like rain on glass. But other nights, there is peace, gaps between the loops, moments of quiet. These are victories, not solutions, but signs of healing. The goal is not to control the mind, it's to coexist with it, to recognize its tricks, to know when a thought is not a truth, but a trap, and to let it pass without building it a home. In the end, the ruminative mind doesn't need more answers. It needs permission to rest, to stop solving what can't be solved, to leave the past alone, to let the future come unplanned. And in that surrender, sleep becomes possible, not because the thought is gone, but because the self is no longer its prisoner. Folie à deux, shared madness. There is a madness that doesn't begin in one person. It starts in silence, in subtle agreements, in glances and unfinished sentences. Two people, alone, vulnerable, lost in their own thoughts, find each other. One begins to speak the unspoken, the other listens, and in that listening, reality begins to bend. This is folie à deux, a shared delusion, a psychological fusion where fantasy is mistaken for fact and two minds collapse into one distorted truth. It begins with one dominant figure, paranoid, obsessive, detached from the ordinary flow of logic. They don't trust others. They see patterns no one else sees. They know something isn't right. The world is dangerous. People lie. Threats are hidden behind smiles. Their fear is total, but it needs an audience. Then comes the second, more passive, more impressionable, lonely, dependent, searching for certainty in a confusing world. They don't question much. They want to believe someone has answers. When the dominant one shares their fears, their theories, their conviction, the passive one doesn't resist. They absorb it, and in absorbing it, they make it real. The delusion grows between them like mold in a sealed room. It feeds on isolation. They stop engaging with others. Friends are dismissed as naive. Family is labeled dangerous. Outsiders don't understand. Only the two of them see clearly. Every doubt is reframed as proof of betrayal. Every disagreement is evidence of a conspiracy. Sleep becomes infected, not with nightmares, but with vigilance. Their minds scan for threats, even in rest, whispers in the dark, sudden awakenings, checking locks, reviewing events over and over. The shared belief consumes every waking hour, and it doesn't let go at night. Their dreams become echoes of the same paranoia. This condition isn't limited to romantic couples. It occurs in siblings, parent-child pairs, close friends, even cult leaders and followers. Anywhere closeness meets instability, the conditions are ripe. It's not the content of the belief that matters. It can be anything from persecution to divine purpose. What matters is the intensity, the certainty, the emotional fusion. Over time, boundaries dissolve. They speak the same phrases, repeat the same ideas, finish each other's sentences, not out of affection, but obsession. They no longer see each other as separate beings, but as one unit, against the world. Anyone who tries to intervene becomes the enemy. The delusion often escalates. It demands action. Paranoia turns into behavior, moving to escape imaginary threats, cutting ties with reality, sometimes even violence. The dominant partner pushes, the passive partner follows, and each step deeper reinforces the belief that they are right and everyone else is wrong. Breaking a folie à deux is almost impossible from the inside. The feedback loop is airtight. Dissent is betrayal. Fear is evidence. Logic is manipulation. The more you challenge them, the more convinced they become. It's not just a belief, it's identity, safety, purpose. The passive one often suffers most. When the bond finally breaks, through arrest, separation, or tragedy, they're left alone with the wreckage. They question everything. Who was I before this? Did I ever believe anything on my own? The dominant one may move on to another follower. The passive one is left to rebuild a mind that no longer knows what to trust. Even after separation, the delusion lingers. Sleep remains restless. The thoughts echo. What if they were right? What if the danger is still out there? The belief may fade, but the fear stays, because even false realities can feel safer than empty ones. And once you've shared madness with someone, normalcy feels cold. This disorder is rare, but its patterns appear in more common forms. Groupthink, mass hysteria, echo chambers. In these spaces, doubt is punished, certainty is contagious, and complexity is erased. The group offers comfort, belonging, identity, but it demands one thing in return: surrender. In extreme cases, folie à deux becomes lethal. Parents who kill their children, believing it's protection. Siblings who die in isolation, convinced of a shared enemy. Couples who commit crimes together under the belief that they are chosen, righteous, above the law. These aren't just stories, they're warnings of what happens when fear meets devotion without resistance. There's a reason this condition terrifies psychologists. It reveals how fragile the mind really is, how reality is not just a solo experience, but a shared construction. And if two people agree on a lie with enough intensity, it becomes their truth. Treatment requires separation, breaking the bond, removing the reinforcement. Only then can the passive partner begin to question, to grieve, to rebuild. But even then, recovery is slow. The brain must relearn how to think independently, how to tolerate uncertainty, how to exist without the other. The dominant partner often resists treatment. They don't see a problem. To them, the delusion is truth. Anyone who disagrees is blind or malicious. They may find another believer. The pattern repeats. What makes folie à deux so haunting is how intimate it is. It's not imposed. It's chosen. Two minds voluntarily collapsing into each other, not through force, but need. The need to be understood, to be seen, to be believed. And that need can be so strong, it overrides everything else, even reality. In the quiet hours of the night, when the world is still, this delusion tightens its grip. The mind seeks confirmation. The other person whispers reassurance. And in that exchange, doubt dies, truth dies. What remains is the illusion of safety, shared, sacred, unshakable. The damage comes later, when the spell breaks, when the world returns, when the other person is gone, and the silence is deafening. Sleep becomes a confrontation, with choices made, thoughts absorbed, things believed that can't be undone. The mind once merged, must relearn how to be alone, and that loneliness feels unbearable, like being exiled from a world you helped invent. Folie à deux is not about weakness, it's about vulnerability, how easily the need to belong can become the need to dissolve, to disappear into another person, to lose the burden of thinking alone. But shared madness, no matter how comforting, always ends the same way, with separation, regret, and the slow rebuilding of truth. Sleep returns eventually, but it comes with new rules, a deeper caution, a fear of closeness, a reluctance to believe too much, feel too deeply, trust too quickly. The mind, once broken by fusion, becomes guarded, and while that guard protects, it also isolates. The cure for shared delusion is not just separation, it's reconnection with reality, with self, with a world that doesn't offer certainty, but does offer freedom. And in that freedom, sleep becomes something different, not an escape, but a return. Emotional numbing. There is a type of survival that doesn't scream. It doesn't cry, break down, or lash out. It simply shuts off. When pain becomes too much, when feelings become dangerous, the mind doesn't resist, it disconnects. This is emotional numbing, a quiet, invisible form of psychological armor, not worn with pride, but with necessity. At first, numbing is protective. The body senses threat, not always physical, often emotional. Rejection, shame, abandonment, failure. These wounds are not seen, but they are felt. And when they go too deep, the mind steps in to reduce the impact. It doesn't erase the pain, it just dulls it, turns down the volume, blurs the lines. Over time, this defense becomes default. Not only is pain blocked, so is joy. Excitement fades. Gratitude feels distant. Laughter sounds foreign. The full range of human experience becomes inaccessible. The world continues, but the self feels separate from it, disconnected, not quite present. People often confuse numbing with strength. You're so calm. You don't let things get to you. But it's not calm. It's absence. What looks like composure is actually withdrawal, a retreat into silence, because feeling is dangerous when it has led to chaos, when vulnerability has been punished, when emotion has become a liability. Sleep becomes complex in this state, not because of overwhelming thoughts, but because of their absence. The mind drifts through static, emptiness, a kind of weightless insomnia. You're tired, but you're not truly present enough to rest. The body lies still, but the spirit is hovering somewhere distant. The causes of emotional numbing vary: chronic trauma, emotional neglect, repeated invalidation, a parent who punished emotion, a partner who manipulated it, a culture that equated vulnerability with weakness. These environments teach one lesson: feeling leads to harm. So, the response is simple: stop feeling. This isn't a decision, it's an adaptation. The nervous system learns to suppress signals. The brain rewires emotional pathways. Neurochemicals shift. It becomes easier to ignore than engage. And like any habit, repetition makes it automatic. Over time, relationships suffer. Friends begin to notice distance. Partners feel unseen. Conversations become shallow, not because of lack of care, but because of lack of access. The emotions are there, buried, dormant, unreachable, and the person suffering from numbing often feels guilt. They want to care more, to feel more, but the door won't open. This disconnection isn't always total. Sometimes moments break through. A song, a memory, a sudden loss. In those flashes, emotion floods in too fast. It's overwhelming, so the system shuts back down. It's a cycle: brief presence, then retreat. Like someone watching life through a fogged window, never fully touching it. One of the cruelest tricks of numbing is how it affects self worth. Without emotion, it's hard to gauge meaning. Achievements feel hollow. Love feels abstract. Gratitude feels forced. This creates a quiet despair. The person begins to ask, "What's wrong with me? Why don't I feel anything?" They may turn to stimulation, loud music, risky behavior, emotional chaos, anything to feel something. Or they may retreat into routine, perfectionism, control, anything to avoid the unknown terrain of real feeling. But neither approach solves the core issue. They just delay it. Sleep, once again, becomes the battleground because it requires surrender. It asks the mind to soften, to feel safe, to release control. But for the emotionally numb, control is the only thing keeping them afloat. Letting go means opening the door to everything they've been avoiding. So they resist, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously. The body stays tense, the mind stays alert. Night becomes another form of vigilance. Even dreams change. They become flat, disjointed, or absent. Or worse, emotion comes back only in sleep, through nightmares, sudden grief, inexplicable dread, and waken feels like pulling back into armor before the day begins. Reversing emotional numbing isn't about forcing feeling, it's about creating safety. The nervous system must believe it's allowed to feel without punishment. This takes time. It starts with awareness, noticing the absence, naming the patterns, saying, "I'm not cold, I'm protecting something." Journaling can help. So can therapy. So can slow, consistent connection with people who don't demand access but offer presence. Healing doesn't come through intensity, it comes through consistency, through small signals to the body that it's okay to soften, that tears won't be punished, that laughter won't be taken away. Often, numbing hides grief, not just grief for events, but for lost self, the child who once felt freely, the version of you who wasn't afraid to care, to love, to risk, to be vulnerable. Reconnecting with that self means mourning their absence, and that mourning, when it comes, is raw. But it's also the first sign of return. Numbing also hides anger, years of repressed boundaries, swallowed words, silent betrayals. When those emotions return, they're often mislabeled as irrational, but they're not irrational. They're delayed. They've waited patiently, and now they demand attention. This can feel overwhelming, but it's progress. Feeling anything is a sign that the armor is cracking. Some people will resist this change. They've benefited from your numbness, your silence, your compliance. They may mock your feelings, dismiss your boundaries, try to pull you back into emotional stillness. Not because they're evil, but because your awakening threatens the dynamic they've come to rely on. But numbness is not peace, it is stasis. Peace involves movement, emotion, expression. Peace includes sadness, disappointment, joy, surprise. Peace includes the whole spectrum of being alive. Reclaiming emotion means accepting mess. Feelings won't be clean. They won't be convenient. They'll rise at inopportune times. They'll contradict each other, but they'll be real. And real is what heals. As the numbness fades, sleep begins to change. The mind doesn't race, it processes. The body doesn't brace, It releases. Dreams become strange, vivid, emotional, sometimes painful, but eventually meaningful. And waking doesn't feel like armor being strapped on. It feels like a continuation of something human. Emotional numbing is not weakness, it's evidence of strength, of endurance, of survival. But survival is not the same as living. And sleep, true sleep, is a sign that the body no longer fears its own vulnerability. The return to emotion is slow, but it is inevitable. Because beneath the armor, the self still breathes, still waits, still feels. Trauma bonding. Pain creates strange loyalties. In some situations, the very person who causes the suffering becomes the only source of comfort. This paradox is the core of trauma bonding, a psychological trap where abuse and affection are intertwined so tightly that escape feels like betrayal and staying feels like survival. Trauma bonding doesn't happen all at once. It forms gradually through a cycle of cruelty and kindness. The abuser inflicts pain, then offers comfort. Humiliation is followed by affection. Fear is soothed with moments of tenderness. Over time, this cycle conditions the victim to associate harm with love. They stop resisting because they're no longer sure what's safe. This bond is not logical. It bypasses the conscious mind and wires itself into the nervous system. Every moment of fear is followed by relief, and that contrast creates intensity. The brain, flooded with stress hormones, begins to crave the chemical payoff of reconciliation. It's not affection being sought, it's dopamine, cortisol, adrenaline, then oxytocin. This chemical roller coaster mimics love, but it's not love, it's addiction. The most insidious part is how subtle it can be. Trauma bonding doesn't always look like bruises or shouting. It can be emotional manipulation, chronic neglect, inconsistent validation. It can wear the mask of romance, loyalty, even protection. One moment you're being degraded, the next you're being held. The contradiction itself becomes the hook. The inconsistency keeps the brain guessing, and uncertainty builds attachment faster than predictability ever could. Sleep becomes difficult in these dynamics because the body remains on high alert. Even during calm periods, the nervous system anticipates the next wave of pain. Safety feels suspicious. Peace feels temporary. The mind replays interactions, trying to decode motives, predict behavior, make sense of emotional whiplash. But there is no logic to intermittent reinforcement. That's what makes it powerful. Victims of trauma bonding often defend their abuser. They minimize the harm, highlight the good moments, rationalize the behavior. They're not always like this. They had a hard childhood. I provoke them sometimes. These justifications aren't weakness, they're survival mechanisms. Admitting the full truth would shatter the bond, and with it, the illusion of safety. Isolation intensifies the effect. Abusers often limit contact with friends and family, not through direct force, but through subtle discouragement. They don't understand us. They just want to break us up. The victim begins to believe that no one else can see what they see, the tender side, the vulnerable side. They feel chosen, needed, special, and in this illusion, they stay. Over time, identity erodes. The victim no longer knows where they end, and the abuser begins. They anticipate needs, silence their own pain, take responsibility for the other's emotions. They become experts at self blame. When things go wrong, they apologize. When things go right, they wait for the next collapse. There is no rest, only anticipation. At night, The mind replays every moment. Was that glance cold? Did that silence mean anger? Is the apology real this time? The uncertainty loops endlessly. The body remains tense. Sleep doesn't come easily. When it does, it's light and broken. Dreams bleed with confusion, fear, longing. Waking feels like falling back into the same script. Breaking a trauma bond feels like withdrawal. The body shakes, the heart races, the emptiness swells. It's not just losing a person, it's losing the only coping system that's been keeping the pain in check. The brain, deprived of the familiar cycle, panics, and many return, not because they want to, but because the silence feels unbearable. Even after escape, the bond lingers. Songs, smells, phrases can trigger waves of emotion. The trauma isn't just in memory, it's in the body. Relationships afterward are hard. Trust feels dangerous. Intimacy feels suspect. The old pattern threatens to repeat because familiarity often feels like safety, even when it's destructive. This is the trick of trauma bonding. It makes suffering feel like home, and when home is pain, the body forgets what peace feels like. Stillness becomes suspicious. Kindness feels manipulative. Distance feels like abandonment. So the mind clings to the abuser, to the pattern, to the belief that this is the best it will ever get. The bond is not a reflection of weakness. It's a response to psychological conditioning, Stockholm syndrome, behavioral reinforcement, complex trauma. These are not excuses, they're explanations. And understanding the mechanism is the first step toward dismantling it. Breaking free requires more than willpower. It requires reprogramming the nervous system, building new patterns, creating safety without chaos. It starts with acknowledging the harm, not just the behavior, but the impact, naming the manipulation, refusing to romanticize inconsistency, seeing love as steady, not euphoric. Therapy helps, connection helps, education helps. But the most important step is reclaiming narrative, saying, this was abuse, this was not love, this was not my fault. That sentence, though simple, fractures the illusion. And from that fracture, something new can grow. Sleep, once contaminated by anxiety and anticipation, slowly becomes a space for recovery. The nightmares may continue for a while. The body may still jolt awake, waiting for conflict. But with time and safety and truth, the system calms. The dreams soften. Rest returns. Trauma bonding is not just a relationship pattern. It's a psychological prison built from pain and hope twisted together. And escaping it is not betrayal, it's survival. It's choosing self respect over adrenaline. It's redefining love as something that doesn't hurt. The bond will resist. It will whisper in moments of loneliness. It will beg for nostalgia. It will disguise itself as forgiveness. But behind every memory is a truth. If it hurt and kept hurting and made you smaller, it wasn't love, it was control. And control dressed as care is still control. The path to healing is long, but it exists. It is paved not with euphoria, but with quiet decisions. Saying no, saying enough, saying goodbye, not just to a person, but to the pattern. And when sleep finally arrives, not as surrender, but as sanctuary, that's when the bond is truly broken. Not with a scream, but with silence, with rest, with peace earned not through suffering, but through self return. Splitting. In the mind, there is often no middle ground, only extremes. Something is either perfect or worthless. A person is either a savior or a traitor. The world is either safe or doomed. This binary thinking, called splitting, is not just a flaw in logic, it's a defense mechanism, a weapon the mind deploys when it can't tolerate uncertainty. Splitting simplifies the unbearable. It turns chaos into order by erasing nuance. It is most common in those who have been hurt early and often, people whose reality was unstable, who were punished for trusting, who learned that being wrong had consequences. For them, nuance is danger, gray is a trap. So the mind divides the world into clean lines, good and evil, loyal and disloyal, love and betrayal. This division isn't intellectual, it's emotional. Someone says something kind. They are pure. They forget to respond. They are malicious. One disappointment, and the whole relationship rewrites itself. Not because the facts changed, but because the emotional container shattered. Splitting protects the self from the pain of contradiction. If someone is all bad, it's safer to cut them out completely than risk confusion. If something is all good, then it must be protected at all costs. But there's a cost. Splitting fractures reality. It destroys the ability to hold complexity. A friend can no longer be flawed and still loyal. A mistake can no longer be just a mistake. It must signal complete failure. Every interaction becomes a test. Every moment is weighted with judgment. Trust is not built. It's demanded. One wrong move, and everything falls apart. This black and white thinking is exhausting. It burns bridges, then mourns their loss. It idealizes, then demonizes. It leaves the mind swinging between highs and lows, unable to settle. And at night, when there is no one to react to, the mind turns inward. The split repeats itself within. You are either a genius or a fraud, a victim or the villain. Every memory becomes evidence for one narrative or the other. There is no gray, only verdict. Sleep becomes difficult because there is no neutrality in the mind. Regret plays like a courtroom trial. Pride is immediately followed by self-disgust. The day's events replay with sharp edges. A single misstep magnifies into a complete collapse. And once the mind turns against itself, there is no defense, no appeal, only judgment. Children raised in unstable environments are especially vulnerable. If love was inconsistent, they learned to monitor every signal. If praise was unpredictable, they internalized the belief that one wrong move would cost everything. As adults, they carry this into relationships. They crave safety, but sabotage it. They expect betrayal and create it. They are always on edge, waiting for the proof that confirms their fears. This chronic hypervigilance feeds splitting. When everything is seen as threat or salvation, the nervous system stays activated. Cortisol floods the body. The mind refuses to rest. Every gesture must be decoded. Every silence must be explained. The inability to tolerate ambiguity becomes a source of constant stress. And so, in bed, instead of drifting into sleep, the brain spins through analysis, replaying what was said, what wasn't said, what it meant, searching for patterns, reassurances, warnings. The absence of closure is unbearable. The ambiguity of real human behavior becomes a loop with no end. Sleep requires surrender, but splitting doesn't allow surrender. It demands certainty. Over time, this thinking begins to shape identity. People become addicted to their own emotional volatility. Rage feels more real than calm. Despair feels more honest than contentment. The middle is too quiet, too unfamiliar. Relationships become cycles. Idealization, conflict, discard, reconciliation. Each loop leaves deeper wounds, and in the silence of night, those wounds open again. The mind, seeking relief, may begin to fantasize alternate versions of events, perfect comebacks, complete severances. But even the fantasy splits. It goes from vengeance to regret to longing and back again. Sleep never comes because the mind never closes the case. What makes splitting so powerful and dangerous is that it feels true. When someone disappoints us, the rage feels justified. When they come back and apologize, the love feels real. But both extremes are distorted. Reality is always mixed. Humans are inconsistent. Kindness coexists with carelessness. Intentions shift. People change. But for the person caught in splitting, admitting that would mean vulnerability. It would mean letting go of control. In some ways, splitting is a survival skill. When a child depends on an unstable caregiver, it's safer to believe the caregiver is all good than to face the truth. But what begins as protection becomes prison. As adults, this same defense makes intimacy impossible. Every flaw is betrayal. Every conflict is the end. Trust becomes a currency too expensive to spend. To challenge splitting is to accept contradiction, to say, I love them, and I'm angry. I failed, and I still have worth. I was hurt, and they weren't trying to hurt me. These are uncomfortable truths, but they are the ones that allow integration, and integration is what heals. It makes sleep possible, because peace isn't about purity, it's about coherence. The darkness of splitting is not just in how it views the world, but in how it consumes the self. It turns the mind into a battlefield. It rewrites memories to fit the narrative of the moment. It isolates. It creates enemies where none exist. And then, when exhaustion sets in, it leaves the person alone with their own fragmented reflection. Sleep, in its essence, requires trust. Trust that the world won't fall apart without you, that the people you love won't vanish, that your own mind won't betray you in dreams. Splitting makes that trust impossible, because if things are either perfect or broken, then safety is always temporary, and sleep becomes a threat to the vigilance that splitting demands. Breaking this cycle requires intention. The first step is noticing the pattern, not trying to fix it immediately, just seeing it, naming the thought, this is black and white, this is all or nothing, then questioning it, not replacing it with positivity, but with nuance, complexity, the acceptance that discomfort and safety can coexist. With time, the nervous system learns to rest in the in between. It stops needing to assign blame. It starts to allow confusion without panic. And when that happens, when the mind no longer needs to judge to feel secure, then sleep becomes natural. Not because the world has become safer, but because the mind has. Malignant narcissism. Some personalities aren't just difficult, they're dangerous. They don't seek validation, they demand control. They don't want admiration, they want domination. This is not vanity, it's not self confidence, it's malignant narcissism, a rare and severe psychological profile where ego, cruelty, paranoia, and manipulation blend into something predatory, a mask of charm covering something hollow, calculating, and always hungry. At first, they seem magnetic. Charisma is their weapon. Their confidence draws people in. Their words are smooth. They know how to mirror emotions, to reflect back exactly what someone wants to hear. But behind that reflection There is no empathy, no remorse, only a need for power. They build their identity through others, controlling them, using them, discarding them. Every relationship is a transaction. Every kindness is bait. Once someone is hooked, the game begins. Control is established slowly. Compliments laced with critique, encouragement followed by doubt. You're brilliant, but too sensitive. You're special, but not quite enough. This is the foundation of control. Keep the victim off balance, needing approval, chasing worth. That never comes. Malignant narcissists aren't content with being admired. They must be worshipped. Any sign of independence is punished. Disagreement becomes betrayal. Criticism becomes war. They react with rage, not because they're hurt, but because their control is slipping. This isn't ordinary narcissism. Malignant narcissism includes sadism, the pleasure of causing pain, emotional pain, psychological collapse, public humiliation. They push people until they break, and then call them weak for breaking. It's not about winning, it's about watching someone lose. They are paranoid. They see enemies everywhere. Friends are spies. Lovers are threats. Anyone who sees too much, knows too much, must be discarded or destroyed. This paranoia isn't random, it's projection. They know what they're capable of, so they assume everyone else is playing the same game. They rewrite reality, deny things they've said, shift blame, distort facts. This isn't forgetfulness, it's weaponized gaslighting. They aren't confused. They want you to be. Doubt is their currency. If you question your memory, your judgment, your worth, you become easier to control. Sleep does not come easy around them. The mind stays alert, replaying conversations, analyzing silence, waiting for the next shift, the next explosion. Living with a malignant narcissist is like sleeping beside a lit fuse, one spark away from chaos. They isolate their targets, slowly, methodically. Friends are discredited. Family is painted as toxic. Coworkers are jealous. Soon, the victim has no one left, no external perspective. Only the narcissist's voice remains, and that voice becomes a law. The cycle always ends the same: discard. When the target is drained, emotionally, financially, psychologically, they are abandoned, mocked for their weakness, blamed for their destruction, then replaced. Malignant narcissists do not mourn, they upgrade, but they are not whole. Behind the cruelty is emptiness. Their identity is fractured, built on illusion. Without constant validation, they collapse. They fear irrelevance more than death, so they consume attention, admiration, obedience. People are tools, not companions. Some reach positions of power: politics, business, religion. Their charm masks their pathology. They build empires on exploitation, and the world, craving strength, often mistakes cruelty for leadership. By the time the truth emerges, damage is done, reputations ruined, lives shattered. They do not introspect. Therapy is useless unless it serves them. They twist diagnosis into justification. They wear labels like armor. I'm just intense. I care too much. I demand excellence. They redefine pathology as superiority. Victims often question themselves. Was it really that bad? Maybe I overreacted. This doubt is part of the design. Malignant narcissists rewrite their victims from the inside out. The person you were before them, confident, clear, alive, becomes a faded memory. Some victims stay for years, not because they're weak, but because they're conditioned. Trauma bonds form. The brain, in survival mode, mistakes chaos for passion, abuse for love, The cycle of idealize, devalue, discard becomes addictive, and leaving feels like withdrawal from illusion, from hope, from the fantasy that the narcissist once pretended to offer. Even after escape, their voice lingers in thoughts, dreams, self talk. You'll never make it without me. You're nothing. You're broken. And these words, repeated enough, become beliefs. Healing means unlearning them, rebuilding the self from pieces left behind. They don't forget the people they've used. If a victim thrives without them, they may return, not from love, but from threat. Success triggers their rage. Independence insults them, so they return with apologies, promises, tears. But it's a new mask, not a new person. They fear exposure. Truth is their poison. When someone tells their story, names the abuse, they retaliate. Smear campaigns, lies, accusations, not to defend themselves, but to erase the narrative. Control must be total, even after separation. But their power fades when the mask is lifted, when others name the pattern, when the spell breaks. They are not complex, not tragic, not misunderstood. They are broken predators who choose harm, and their greatest fear is irrelevance, being truly seen and ignored. Healing after malignant narcissism is slow. Sleep returns in fragments. Safety feels unfamiliar. Joy feels suspicious. The body stays tense, even in rest. But gradually, trust returns, not in others, but in the self. The voice inside grows louder than theirs. Survivors often become hyper aware, sensitive to manipulation, intolerant of falsehood. This isn't damage, it's evolution. Scars become instincts, lessons become boundaries. What once destroyed them now protects them. Malignant narcissists don't change, but their reach can be limited. Their damage can be undone. Their stories can be told. And in those stories, others find warning, validation, and strength. In the end, they are nothing without control. Without someone to dominate, they collapse into their own emptiness. Their empire is built on mirrors, and when the light fades, nothing remains. True peace comes not from revenge, but from absence, from the silence they cannot enter, the life they cannot touch, the self they can no longer rewrite. And sleep, when it finally comes, is not interrupted by threats, by shame, by false promises. It comes gently, because the war is over, and the voice in your head is finally your own.